Welcome to the first episode of the Concept Synergy podcast. I am your host, Ruben Chavez. This will be the introduction / overview of the entire podcast and what it's going to be about. But before we get any further, I would like to say a thank you to the people who participated in the creation of a survey, which will be mentioned later in the episode. So I have the list right here of the people who helped in the creation of this survey, so I'll go ahead and read them off right now. Mona F., Jamal P., Sabrina H., Alina R., Ariana M., Herbert M., Jeanette G., Raylene E., Victoria A., Alyssa F., Scott A., Flor B., Logan C., Luis R., Link, Omar C., Cami, Andrew, Michael, Cody, Bjorn K., Franny O., Jelly Kitten, and Julian V. All right, so let's get into what this podcast is going to be about. This podcast is going to be about discussing possible solutions for problems I see in the world. And the way I would be presenting these ideas would be in a policy-like format, because that made the most sense to me, just because I believe it would give people probably the most detailed information when it comes to explaining these ideas to the best of my ability. Now, I will like to make the point that this is not a political podcast, but it will have political elements to it. And this is mainly for context in discussing these problems and ideas and policies to address those problems to provide solutions. But while we are on the topic of politics, I would like to disclose who I voted for in the past. In 2012, I voted for Ron Paul. In 2016 and 2020, I voted for Bernie Sanders. And I would have voted for Jesse Ventura if he were to run in 2020 or in the future. Now, why did I vote for these people in particular? Ron Paul was a libertarian running as a Republican in 2012. Bernie Sanders was an independent, self-identified democratic socialist running as a Democrat in 2016 and in 2020. And Jesse Ventura is an independent who did win governorship, and even before that, the mayor position in Minnesota. And he won that mayorship back in the 1990s. And then later became governor, running against a Democrat and Republican for the seat in 1999. So he won that in 1999 and served, I believe, until 2003. And the reason why I voted for these three were I believe that they, at least to me, seemed honest, consistent, and for the people. That's it. Those were my reasons. And yes, even though they are all on different sides of the political spectrum, with Bernie being far left, Ron Paul being far right, and Jesse being, I would say, kind of more in the middle, they each had ideas that I believe, were, for the most part, good for the people, the U.S., and the world at large. Whether it's the idea of Medicare for all, which is something that Bernie Sanders has been for, I believe, since he first got into Congress about 30 years ago or so, or even before then when he was mayor of Burlington. And then if we take a look at Ron Paul, he was more for getting back to the gold standard, which would basically allow us to use gold and silver as our currency. And since these are deflationary currencies, we wouldn't lose our value to inflation and see prices rise so dramatically as we've seen in the past with the financial crisis of 2008. And what we're going through right now with what we saw back in 2020 in March. But let's get back to Ron Paul and more reasons of why I voted for him. He was against all foreign wars. His belief was we had to get out of these wars because they were waste of trillions of dollars, which he was right, at least in my opinion. I know people might disagree with that, but again, that's one of the reasons why I liked him. So those were just a couple things about Ron Paul that I liked. There are many other things that I could have gone into, But let's go ahead and move on to Bernie Sanders. Again, with Bernie Sanders, you have things like universal health care. You have other things like family leave, expanding Social Security, total student loan debt forgiveness, and just things dealing with getting money out of politics. And in some ways, going after the big corporations. And with Jesse Ventura, he seems to be able to have the ability to basically get the best ideas from both sides and have an open mind about implementing them. He supports a lot of what Bernie Sanders proposes, and I'm pretty sure he also supports or aligns with some of the things that Ron Paul has spoken about in terms of getting out of these wars and getting back to real money, so that way we don't have to deal with inflation or these crashes that we see within these last 2 decades. So again, those are just my main reasons why I liked and voted for these 3 different individuals who were running for office or would have run in terms of Jesse Ventura's situation, because he has not run yet, but he almost came close to running back in 2020, 2016, but it just didn't happen. All right, so let's get on to, I want to give a little bit of a backstory of how this kind of all started, because the podcast was not really the main focus. This started back in May of 2020. Bernie Sanders had just suspended his 2020 campaign back in April, a month prior. In the beginning, it looked like he was going to win the primary, but we could get into why he didn't, but that would be probably for another time. So he didn't win. If he had won, I personally felt like a lot of the problems we had in terms of the world and our country were probably going to be addressed. And I wouldn't have to worry about them anymore because at least someone would take care of them. So I started, due to his loss back in April, started in May writing, I guess, this project of getting these ideas, putting them into a platform-like style. And the whole goal is to create a platform that anyone could run on and win or be elected to whatever office they choose to run for, whether it's a local office, mayor, governor, House, Senate, or even president. Anyone who chose to run on this platform could run on the full platform, or they could choose portions of it, whether it's a single issue or a series of issues. So they can basically mix and match different policy ideas of this platform to create basically their own customized platform that's based on this bigger platform, if that makes any sense. And I believe it doesn't matter if the person considers himself aligned left, right, center, politically, or even unaffiliated as an independent. I believe that no matter what they identify as long as they ran on this platform or portions of it, or even one issue from it, they could win. And so why do all this now? Why create this platform? Why get these ideas, put them together, and try to just lay them all out? With Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders most likely not running ever again in the future because of their age, and that's what they've said publicly, like they would never run again. Again, we can still hope for a Jesse Ventura because he's still somewhat younger than they are. And again, due to this, I see it's difficult to find someone who is honest, consistent, and for the people, and is actually in politics at the moment to fill their shoes. One name that does come to mind is Andrew Yang, but we do not know if he will be running in the future in 2024 or probably in 2028. So that's kind of why I'm doing this now. It would be nice to kind of, in essence, create the next Bernie Sanders, the next Ron Paul, or the next Jesse Ventura. And again, I would like to reiterate that the main focus of this podcast should be these ideas / policies, if you want to call them policies, even though they're probably most likely just ideas at the moment. I'd like to go over what's called the main chart, PDF, which is basically this project. It has policies on here that you may have already heard of, such as Medicare for All, UBI, which is Universal Basic Income, Gold Standard, and many more. Let's kind of see, I'll probably put screenshots in the video. If you're listening on audio, I'll just kind of go over them as I see them. So let's see, we got universal healthcare, Medicare for all, single payer healthcare system. We have things like paid family leave. We have things like total student loan debt forgiveness, criminal justice reform, end private prisons, reinstate gold standard, audit and reform the FRA, end corporate lobbying, end Citizens United, enact STOCK Act, abolish PAT Act, expand Social Security, legalize marijuana and cannabis. So those are kind of just ideas that have been brought forward in previous presidential cycles. And then also on this chart, it's divided into basically three sections. We have kind of social-based policy issues. We have existing system-based policy issues that need to be updated. And then at the bottom, we have my original social and or system-based policy issues. So these are more, well, if you were to look at the chart, it's got like a legend. It divides it by color. Blue represents social-based policy. Green represents existing system-based policies that need to be updated. And the purple kind of represents concepts and ideas of social and system-based policies that are original to me, or are kind of my original ideas. And then with the yellow, it's policy issues that have been mentioned or brought up in recent campaign cycles by political candidates or political social leaders. Gray represents policy based on existing past policies and or ideas that never got a chance for implementation. And then the magenta color kind of represents taking policy and remixing it or adding new idea elements or concepts to improve the original source with slight tweaks in creating a new modern version of it. So again, I'll kind of go over my original ideas. So let's go ahead and kind of look. Some of my original ideas are housing for the homeless. I call it shelter for all. Food for the hungry, sustenance for all. Medical megastructure hospitals, that would be creating these massive hospitals that have great capacity of millions of people. And also, well, let's not kind of get into it now. Medical megastructure hospitals. We also have things like Technological Advancement Task Force, Food Waste Prevention Initiative, Clean Oceans Initiative, Hemp Haven Initiative, Plastic Currency Act, Plastic Resources Value Act, and many, many others. Just to name a few: direct democracy system, reform and update immigration system, and college system and curriculum reform, advancement in Li-Fi technology and implementation, and many, many, many others. So these are kind of the ideas that each episode will be based on. Again, I don't know how long each episode would be. And again, this is kind of just the beginning. A lot of these are being worked on and written and are closer to the beginning of the process than completion. And the podcast, I would like to say, is just to have a broader discussion of these ideas, policy topics. And this was kind of the decision of making this podcast. It was a friend of mine, Julian V. He said, this is something you should probably share with other people in some sort of format. And we kind of decided that a podcast would probably be the best format to do it in. So it's been 5 years since I've actually done a podcast, so I apologize for the quality. I will be working on kind of improving it, getting better mics and such, and kind of getting back into podcasting, because again, it's been 5 years, so I'm kind of rusty, so to speak. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the Google Form survey that I created. It will be in the video description, hopefully by the time I put this on YouTube. For those who would like to participate, let me go ahead and explain the premise of the survey. The survey is, if you were to run for president, what one policy or 3 to 5 policies would you run on? Or basically, the gist of the question is, what policies are important to you and why? I would like to specify that this survey was created after the main chart was finished in order to see if it covered important issues that others were concerned about. So again, this whole chart was created and finished before I even created that survey. Because again, I just needed to see if I was headed in the right direction in terms of what were the main concerns of people. And I didn't want to do that before. I wanted to do it after to see if I was just on the right track. So if people do choose to participate in the survey, they do not have to use their real name if you don't want to, but you must use a valid email address. That just kind of prevents people from taking it twice and kind of messing with the numbers. Participants will receive 2 PDF files, one being the main chart PDF and the other being the explainer PDF, which briefly summarizes what each policy idea is about. Oh, and if you would like to leave some feedback on this podcast, the email address is conceptsynergypodcast@outlook.com, and that will probably be updated once we kind of get our domain set up. And also there will be a Google form survey to kind of see what topic idea from the main chart people are interested in. That will kind of help me create or give me an idea for what future episodes to do next. And for those listening on YouTube who do not want to take the survey, you could just leave a comment on what topic you would like me to cover next. A few more things before we close out. I haven't necessarily decided on the podcast hosting service I would be with in terms of distribution. Probably by the time this episode comes out, I will probably have made my decision. But if there are any podcast hosting services that you think would be good for this type of podcast, please let me know. Thank you. And if you happen to be listening to this podcast from another platform, the links to the surveys should be in the show notes. Thank you for watching this episode. Please share with others you believe would be interested in these topics or ideas that are in this podcast. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. And thank you again for watching. Have a good one.